Russian troops are advancing through Ukraine. What follows is likely to be Europe's most intense war in a generation.
The aim is regime change, is to topple the government in Kyiv, and that's what we're seeing happening here.
What might happen next?
Берите власть в свои руки.
And what does this mean for the world?
Shashank, I'd like to get your perspective on this, because what none of us thought would actually happen, except it must be said you, Shashank, has happened. So is it a trial run for further aggression by Russia and Putin? I mean, is he going to go beyond Kyiv?
What I've seen in recent days, as the invasion became more apparent and then as it occurred, is quite serious, credible, sober voices on foreign policy who, don't sensationalize these things, asking themselves that question: where's he going to stop? Our baseline assumption about Putin's appetite for risk and his ambition and his judgment, the way his cost-benefit calculus works, has changed in recent days. And I think that requires us to raise the possibility, however small, of a Russian challenge going onto NATO territory proper.
Talk us through the scenarios of escalation. What do you worry about most?
The ones that worry me most in terms of real, concrete, tangible escalation risks are simply the fact of having 190,000 Russian troops in close proximity to NATO forces. And neither side has to seek a confrontation for escalation to be a problem. But we have already seen how Vladimir Putin is using the manipulation of risk to try and get NATO to back down. He said in the same blood-curdling speech in which he declared war on early Thursday morning that he hinted at nuclear consequences. He talked about escalation and direct attacks on the West. And I think it's important that while understanding these risks have to be managed, NATO also realizes there is no deterrence without some risk, and that all policies carry risk, and Russia cannot have a monopoly on elevating it and using it to get the other side to back down.
Arkady, do you think that Western sanctions thus far have passed the credibility test?
They might have passed the credibility test as far as the West is concerned. I was talking to my friends in Kyiv yesterday, and we have 3 correspondents there, and the sense of abandonment by a lot of them. They're saying, we are in the heart of Europe, we are being shelled, we are being killed, and the West is dithering and is introducing this sort of small steps. This is fundamentally about values. I think the West and the public needs to recognize that it's the moment of its own making, that actually the West needs to do it not just for the sake of Ukraine. It needs to do it for its own sake of self-respect and holding together all those things that provide the foundation of political systems in Europe.
One of the many ways in which Vladimir Putin could react is through unconventional means, so cyber warfare, as you yourself said in particular. How well is the West prepared for Russian hackers hitting key targets?
It's a lot better prepared than it has been in the past. And of course, we should remember it was a Russian cyber operation that made the 2016 US presidential election so contested and so difficult. So there is a concern. But what I would say to all of that is that in general, Russia's intention here is probably to try and signal to the West, stay out of this conflict. It isn't to try and do something that would draw the West in. The thresholds that Russia applies are still going to be sensible. They're still going to be calculating. They're not going to just sort of blow things up during the US in a spasm of violence or cyber-enabled violence for no reason. Strategy is still at work here. So I think we shouldn't sort of think all of a sudden there's going to be a huge cyber blow. Russia will use these in calibrated, cautious ways to signal to the West and to hit back and to deter further actions.
The key aspect here is NATO's Article 5 principle, the idea that if one member of NATO is attacked, that they're all attacked. And that's the basis on which NATO's security fundamentally lies.
And do you think those unconventional attacks would amount to something that would trigger Article 5?
The short answer is no. Article 5 is about an armed attack in NATO. It is possible, Zanny, to imagine cyber attacks that could reach the threshold of Article 5. Those, for example, that disabled key military forces, that caused serious physical damage to infrastructure. And it is possible for cyber attacks to cause that kind of damage. But I would say much more likely is cyber attacks in the cognitive space, disinformation, propaganda, confusion, things that sort of are much lower down the threshold than those which would cross Article 5.
But I can see scenarios in which, let's take cyber war, which lethal things happen, where it's unclear whether that threshold's been reached. And if that happens, you can imagine Putin testing the strength of this bond and trying to find fissures and splits within NATO that mean that actually that Article 5 becomes less credible. It's not something that happens quickly. It happens gradually over a number of years. And if you get a disagreement between NATO members about whether to go with Article 5 or not, the whole alliance is weakened.
Shashank, do you agree? Do you agree that that is a possibility? I mean, that's a fundamentally scary thought.
I think that that commitment is only as credible and robust as people believe it is. And so if Putin has recast the map of Europe by changing a regime in Kyiv to his liking, by changing the status quo in Belarus, weakening the position, the military position and the defensibility of the Baltic states and of Poland, perhaps even by sending refugees flooding into those states, casting a shadow over the independence of Moldova, which has long had an area occupied by Russian forces, then yes, that is a threat to Article 5.
One thing that has I've been wondering about is just how much China knew about, gave the nod to, or was surprised by what Vladimir Putin has done. Do you think China is actively supporting Russia?
I think China is guided by three principles. One is its alliance with Russia against the United States in particular. Another is its principle of non-interference. And the third is its desire not to be affected by sanctions. And those three things are impossible to pursue all at once at the same time. So it has to make some very difficult choices. And I think in the end, the one that it will sacrifice is its principle of non-interference. So I think it will help Russia, but there's no doubt that it's uncomfortable about all of this. And I don't think this is something that China has engineered or planned or encouraged Russia to do.
And let's now turn to de-escalation, because I want to see if there are ways that, or how you think this can be de-escalated. And Arkady, let's get your sense of that. Do you see a path where Putin will de-escalate?
I'm afraid to say that I think the only way in which he would de-escalate is if he has a sense of real resistance. Any sign of weakness and appeasement would only invite further attack. All the evidence, all the empiric evidence suggests that only strong response is likely to stop Vladimir Putin. Putin is not the bravest man. He is much more of a thug who goes where he is allowed to go. So I think the only way to de-escalate, in my view, is to build a very serious and credible set of deterrents and being able to hold that line. This is actually sort of a decisive moment for Europe and for Russia itself. Taking Kyiv, bombing Kyiv, the cradle of Russian cities, the center of ancient civilization, is a step which could have absolutely unpredictable consequences. We're in uncharted waters here.
To read more about the war in Ukraine, please click the link to visit our hub, where you'll find all of our coverage. Thanks again for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.